focus circles.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, if I'm gonna read anything out of the Bible, I'm gonna use my
bifocals.
no
lines.
my Bible. I'm not gonna say my focals. I spilled my drink.
You about such a drink, bruh. I gotta try this drink too, because you said it's awful, right? This is a Hope Harness special.
Hope Harness. Yeah, told us about these.
They're called what are they called? That's an Alani. A-L.
Because we got a little junk about drinking Monsters, so
the Rocket Pop.
We shifted away from it to the Rocket Pop Alani. Try that.
Wow. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah,
that doesn't even pass as an energy drink.
It's got a bunch of whatever the energy drinks
have in diesel fuel.
It only has 10 calories and it's supposed to be better for you. So I think that puts us at a healthier spot. I did bring you some water, but I brought you flavored water too.
Yeah.
It's got
like a mango fart in it.
Mango passion fruit.
Have
you ever had passion fruit?
No.
It's delicious.
Is it good?
Oh my gosh. I had it in Africa. That's the first time I had it. It's good. Have you ever had, do you remember, I know you've had these. You remember when we were in Israel? You know those
star fruit things that smelled like an onion?
I don't like a star fruit. No. It was those persimmons, but they were big foreign persimmons. Oh my gosh. Not like our persimmons.
No, it's true. Then they had this one other fruit in Israel that like smelled really bad. And so remember that one lady brought it on the bus? Remember that?
Maybe.
The fruit smelled really bad, and it was always there at the meals. You could always smell that one particular fruit. And then she brought it on the bus that one day. We were trying to like go on tour, and it was just.
I remember you and I riding down the streets of. It may have been Mombasa or somewhere outside of Mombasa. I don't remember now. And a tuk-tuk.
That guy jumped on the edge of it trying to give us that cash.
Yeah, trying to rip us off.
I don't remember what all that was about. Yeah, some Russian guy jumps on the edge of our tuk-tuk in the middle of Africa, and he is trying to give us like some kind of cash or something. He's sticking cash, and he's like giving us this cash. Somebody else jumps on the other side of the tuk-tuk. It was a whole thing.
I was like, hit the gas, Johnny. We gotta go.
And that guy's like, me.
He was probably wide open.
That's everything it had.
Truth be known.
Everything it had. Okay, well, guys, welcome to the That Church podcast. My name's Kendall Harness. I'm one of the co-hosts of the That Church podcast. I co-host this podcast with my dad, Pastor Scott Harness, who is the pastor of that church. The founding pastor of that church as a whole and the speaking pastor at that church in Sherwood. So we are here jumping into the week, what is this, week 3? Or week 2. Week 2 of our new series called My Big Fat Mouth. In this podcast, we have 2 main goals. A is to share extra content that we do not get to share on the weekends. We want to share that with you or else that content just goes to waste. And then B, to help you dive into your Bible more. Our desire is to see people more educated on the Bible and an opportunity for them to grow in biblical literacy, which is literally just the understanding of the Bible. So that's our goal. With that said, let's get to a quick start because we've kind of talked around a little bit. So let's get to a quick start. Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Is there such a thing as positive criticism? Because this past weekend's message was about criticism. And I'm wondering, is it possible for criticism to be positive? More so, is criticism a tool that can be used for positive or negative, or is it more so a thing that is just always negative?
No, I think criticism, when we look at criticism at its core, good positive criticism is I like the word coaching.
Okay.
I like the word input, directing. I think all of those are hugely important. When I look at criticism, I think the difference between toxic criticism and what we would call good criticism, I think, is fundamentally what is the end goal. What are we ultimately trying to accomplish? If I'm trying to accomplish through criticism, if I'm trying to accomplish if in the end I want to break the person down,
sure.
And sometimes criticism comes your way, or you give criticism because the person on the other side, you're threatened by them,
sure,
or maybe you're jealous of them,
sure.
Or maybe you want control over them that may not be control that you should have.
Sure.
That's toxic criticism. Toxic criticism in the end wants to make the person broken.
Sure.
Now, good criticism, coaching, has this deep-seated desire to make the person better. I want to make this person, I want their life to be the best that it can be because I love them, I care for them, I want what's best for them. Now, there's still strategies,
sure,
in that, but I think really the essence of the difference between what we would call toxic criticism or good criticism is what's the end goal. One is the achievement is to make you broken. The other is the achievement would be to make the person better.
Sure. Well, and I think that even the 2 words that you used there with coaching coaching implies a different level of investment into the person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Comparison to like a critic of a movie probably doesn't know the person who made the movie. They're critiquing the movie. I'm just going to give you a critique, and my job and my title and my desire is to give a good critique. As to where a coach is invested in the players in which they're coaching, is invested in the people that they're investing in, not just in the critique that they give, but also in the relationship that they probably have with that person or that player or whatever it may be. And their end desire is to make the team better by making the player better. So obviously if you get the players, better players equals a better team, and better team equals more wins. So that's better for the coach and everyone involved. So I think ultimately that's what. So criticism is a tool. It can be used both positively or negatively. Now, Ephesians 4:29, this verse, it says this. It says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." I love the phrase that's in Ephesians 4 that talks about, it says, building others up. And I think it's a core difference between one it tears down, sure, the other builds up. And I think it just lends itself to this idea that when I'm criticizing somebody, and that word just by itself feels very negative. Oh, 100%. But if I am criticizing somebody in a positive way, my ultimate desire is not to take something away from them, but your ultimate desire, when you really care about that person, I really care about them, but there's times where someone you love is going in the wrong direction. I think it's important to make note of the opposite of criticism is not compliments. That's not the opposite. And I think we sometimes do that. I think sometimes as Christians, we're like, okay, I can not ever tell somebody that there's something that's wrong. Sure. Some of your best friends, some of the people who care the most about you, that's the people that'll say, hey, your fly's down. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Sure. You got a booger. Sure. You got a booger showing. Yeah, sure. You got, the people who really love you are not just saying the things you want to hear. Right. They're saying the things that need to be heard. But I do think there's a strategy to saying them. Right. I think that's where discernment, and I think that's where a little bit of practice and preparation goes a long way. But ultimately, we just want to build something. You want to build somebody up. Can you build somebody up by criticizing them? I think you can. Sure. How you do it is really important. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think the position from which you do it from, the tone that you carry, the practice and the plan that you kind of bring into criticism. We see several times in Scripture where people are critiqued or corrected by someone else in Scripture, another authoritative figure, whether it be Jesus himself or Paul or whatever else. Paul even corrects Peter at a point in Scripture. It's a pretty harsh critique from Paul. It's kind of some aggressive language. And Paul critiques several other people in the faith throughout Scripture. And I think the interesting part about that, though, is that you go, okay, does that mean that Paul's not pulling his punches? He's not using less harsh language. He may not be cussing at him, but he's not using like less harsh language. He's using harsh language, but he's doing it with the goal of ultimately building up the faith and building up the work that is being done here. I think one of the big things too when you're dealing with stuff like this is that and we practice this here at that church with the people who we work with and the people who we lead. One of the things we work really hard not to do is we work not to make something personal. So, for example, if someone needs a critique, there's something that's not being done, we don't enter that conversation and go, hey, I just want to let you know I love you. Sure. And you mean something to me. Yeah. And you're a powerfully wonderful person. Yeah. But you really stink at this job, and you got to stop doing the stupid crap. You're making me upset. Yeah. Well, what you did was you immediately made this personal. It's personal now. Now the critique's good. You went personal. You went to the love word. You went to the you matter word. Yeah. If you just make it about the issues. Yeah. And I've found the less emotion I inject into a conversation like that, the better that conversation goes. Yeah. If I come in real emotional, and let's say, for instance, and this is the difference between coaching critique versus maybe an out of the blue critique. Sure. One of the ways that we can mess our opportunity up is we don't say things when they need to be said. Sure. And we don't say that consistent enough. So what happens is, and the reason why we don't is we don't have the courage. I didn't have the courage to tell that person right off the bat what they did there. I didn't appreciate and I didn't like it. Yeah. So, or that didn't go well. Or that didn't look right. So what you do is you build it up, but you didn't say it at first because you didn't have the courage to say it. So finally, anger builds up and emotion builds up. Yeah. And I'm gonna tell you something. Whoa. Yeah. And you hit this person with 6 months worth of frustration and you make it emotional. If you inject emotion into that conversation, you're gonna get emotion back. 100%. You come at them angry, like, what are you so mad about? I didn't know what was going on.
honestly, coaching should be ongoing. The one
Sure.
reason why a coach can speak into the lives of the people that they coach is because they're consistently speaking into them. You expect that. The less someone expects you speaking into their life, the more chance that criticism has of going sideways.
Sure. And so kind of what we're establishing here is kind of the ground rules for positive criticism so far. So what we've said is that one of the ground rules for positive criticism is having a relationship with the person. That does not necessarily mean that you could not offer criticism to someone that you don't have a relationship with, but at the same time, having a relationship of some kind where you're not only invested in the critique, but you're invested in them as a person could make a big difference in how far your critique goes.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of times where, especially in the Christian community, and this turned a lot of people off to Christianity, even Christians, a lot of times what we did as Christians in a general sense is we focused a lot on the critique and we did not focus very much on the relationship. And so therefore we had a lot of rules with no relationship, and ultimately that leads to rebellion. We've talked about that before. It's like if you just impose rules and you have no relationship with the person, it leads to rebellion. They're not going to do what you want them to do because it lacks relationship, which again, all this parallels. I love how in Ephesians it says this. It says that same verse, going back to it, it says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up. So we've talked about that so far. Only say what is helpful for building others up. But listen to this next part. According to their needs. So every human being has needs. They have needs. They have desires. They have things they want. They want to maybe succeed, or they want to survive, or they want to thrive, or they want to whatever. A natural part of being human is that you would desire relationships with others. You would desire that we need relationships. In fact, it is typically, that doesn't mean like everybody needs 1,000 friends and that's all they need. No. What I'm saying though is that it is very typical and basic of a human survival instinct for us to desire to be in community. It's a very basic thing. That doesn't mean that you don't like being alone and, oh my gosh, I don't need my alone time, whatever. Okay, yes, but we desire to be in community. And sometimes in our world today, we think, well, I actually like being in isolation. It's like, yeah, okay, but you go to the grocery store to get your food. Somebody else had to put that food there. You're living in community. You just don't think you are. You think you're living in isolation, but actually you're living in community still because you had to buy something from a farmer who ultimately farmed the food, blah, blah, whatever. Point being is this, is that we have needs relationally. And the instruction that we're given here is that, hey, we're to give according to the person's needs. Sometimes a person needs a critique. Sometimes they need a relationship more than they need a critique at the moment. Sometimes they need the combination of the two. And it's our job as Christians to discern what exactly that looks like.
And that's what I was going to say. I would say that discernment is such a critical part. I will
100%.
say this though, just, and these are just, good ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have to give somebody a critique, if it doesn't have to be personal, don't make it personal.
100%.
Make it about whatever's wrong. So if your spouse is not being considerate of your feelings or something, then don't say, well, you're just an inconsiderate someone.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And you'll always be this way.
I'm sick of you because you're always been inconsiderate. You're just like your mama. So you don't do that. So if it's just that, hey, when you didn't give me that card for my birthday, it made me feel this way.
Yeah.
Don't make it personal. The second thing is the less emotional injection you can make into that conversation, the better chances that critique or that criticism has of surviving. So if I don't make it, if I'm not teary-eyed and mad and ready to swing and fight,
let me tell you,
because you're going to get back what you're giving.
Absolutely.
So if I want to really have success, and the end goal is I want this to be better, and that's what you have to do. Criticism sometimes is used as a tool to get back at somebody. It's our revenge tool.
Yeah.
Well, when you do that might or might not work, but in the end, we may not be better because of it.
Sure.
If I'm using criticism and I want it to be good criticism, I'm not using it as a weapon.
Sure.
I'm using criticism as the means to an end.
Sure.
I want things to be better. I want this relationship to be better. So all of these have to, I think that they all have to add in. I do think there's discernment. I also think there's this component you got to think about the person you're talking to. Can they receive a criticism from you? And if they can't, I know we feel obligated today that I feel like that if it needs to be said, I better say it. And if I don't say it, I missed out on something. I don't think that's strategic enough. There's plenty of times where Jesus is just silent.
Yeah.
There's times where if, in fact, there's a verse that says, don't cast your pearl before swine, they'll just trample on it.
Yep.
And what that means is that there's a time that something should be said and a change should be made, but you might not be the person that can do the saying,
Sure.
and you might not have any opportunity to make the change.
Sure.
Having the discernment to be able to know when you should and when you shouldn't is really a critical part of understanding criticism.
Sure.
And my relationships are going to be better because of that. There's times where I will have somebody in my life that steps out of my life.
Sure.
And I'll see something in their life that's out of place. But I know, because of where our relationship is and how they perceive me, I probably can't give them that advice. Even
Sure.
though it would be good advice, they couldn't receive it.
Sure.
Knowing when to say and not to say, when to throttle up, when to hit the brakes, all that's going to be important. And there's no one simple set of rules. Most of the time you'll know. If you'll set your emotions aside and say, I'm not making this emotional, will this result in things being better? If it won't, sometimes you just have to say, okay, I'm going to pray about that instead.
Sure.
Talking
Sure.
to them directly might not change things.
No.
Their heart needs to change. So I'm going to pray to the God who can change their heart.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to pray about it and go from there. So
Absolutely. Well, and I think that, we talk about criticism and giving a critique, and most of the time I would say our desire is for it to be positive, because you don't want the conflict. Most people don't want to go into a conversation and just be in constant conflict. They would rather just it be a simple conversation and us move on. And I'm the same way. I think there's times where critique is required, where there's got to be a bringing of the facts, if you will, kind of like, hey, we need to sit down and we need to talk about this, and we need to see where we're kind of at. I think in those moments, you're right. I think you try to make it non-emotional as possible. And I think in those moments, you got to be specific too. I think you got to be really specific about what exactly is going on.
That's
and blah,
right.
blah.
And don't let it jump the fence.
Agreed.
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 If you have an issue with somebody and that issue is whatever it is, let's say they were supposed to bring the groceries for the get together and they didn't bring the groceries or whatever.
Right.
Then you make it about the groceries. You don't make it about them being inconsiderate. You don't make that about them being selfish.
Sure.
The moment you make it personal in that way and it jumps the fence and you start using these big terms to give great categories, you're never.
Sure.
All of that stuff just turns this into nothing gets better.
Right. It's just an argument now.
It's just a fight.
And we're both going to hate each other at the end, and no one's going to get any closer to where we want to be.
That's
well,
right.
the other thing too is that one of the things that we talk about here on staff and dealing with staff members and whatever else is that, when we give a critique or we give a write-up or whatever else, the write-up or the critique is about the thing, not the person. So it's like, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about a failure or a mess up, which everybody has. Everybody's going to make a mistake at some point. Critiques are a normal thing, should be a normal thing. In our society, critiques are kind of seen as always negative, but actually critiques are positive when presented in the right way and when given the right rules. They actually be a very positive thing to help someone really develop, because if no one critiques you, you might continue doing something stupid and not even know that you're doing it. And be like, I didn't even know I was doing it wrong. It's like, why? Well, no one said anything. Nobody said it was wrong. Yeah. Everyone just continued on like it was good, kept patting me on the back and sending me on my merry way. And they sent me right on my merry way, right off the edge of a cliff. And it's like, that's unfair. But at the same time, you go, okay, when we give a critique though, we give a critique about the thing. What's the problem? Like you say, what's the problem? Is it, if we're not taking out the garbage, it's about the garbage. It's not about personalities or this or that or the other or your Myers-Briggs results from your personality test. It's not about that. It's about the trash being taken out. Let's make the critique about the thing that we're critiquing and not get out of bounds, because that's typically where you see flare-ups and fights and whatever else is whenever we get out of bounds of really what the target of the argument was, or the disagreement was even. And that's how you see these things kind of happen, which segues us a little bit into the weekend recap from this past weekend. We've been talking about how we're either a hope dealer or a fault finder. And this past weekend, we talked about that. And I love this verse. Galatians 5:14-15 says this. It says, "For the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out, beware of destroying one another."
I love that verse. I think one of the things that it displays is humility. And I think when it comes to when we're dealing with criticism, and let's just say we're the one giving the critique, we're the one giving the criticism. It's if you don't make it about that person you're criticizing is important personally.
Yeah.
Don't make it personal.
Don't make it personal.
But it ain't about you either.
Sure.
And so what's being said here is it's saying that, love your neighbor as yourself. That means that, sometimes false humility among Christians is like this, is that we try to pretend like we don't think about ourselves, and we got this fault, and I don't remember who said it, but someone said humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Sure.
And so when I go into this criticism and I'm having this conversation, I don't need to make it about me either, because sometimes criticism is, we use it sometimes as the opportunity for us to build ourselves up by showing that I'm smarter than you. I know more than you do. Let me tell you the reason why this is not happening, and this is how it's supposed to go, because I know how it's supposed to go. And we want everybody in the room to know we're the biggest personality.
Sure.
We're the smartest person. We're the brightest person on the block. When you do that, it's hard to receive that criticism. I mean, I have a hard time receiving criticism from somebody that comes from a place of arrogance.
Yeah.
When you project arrogance, even the message is tainted by it. You can be giving the best advice a person could ever hear, but if you've got it peppered with arrogance and self-righteousness, people can't receive it.
No, 100%.
It's like I used to tell people, if I baked you this unbelievable chocolate cake with thick chocolate icing, it's the best cake you've ever had, but I took a toothpick and I stuck it in dog poop and I just kind of strung it through that cake. You don't exactly know where. Does it matter how much poop got in there?
Nope.
The cake's ruined.
Yep,
You know what I'm saying?
over.
And so the truth is that you could be giving somebody absolutely wonderful advice, but fill it with the poop of arrogance, and you're just simply not gonna get anywhere. And so this is, you use the litmus test of you not being the subject and how that you bring about this conversation.
Sure. Well, I think that, it's a warning in Galatians 5:14-15. It's a warning. It's also a simplification. The closer we get to Jesus, the simpler things become. And I looked at this verse Sunday, and as I was getting ready to teach, I sat there, I was like, man, Paul's the writer of Galatians. He's sitting there and he's going, you know what? There's so much talk of the law. There's so much talk of how things should be done or executed or whatever. And then Paul sums up the entire law in one sentence, which is, for the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. You can't love your neighbor as yourself and critique them harshly in a way that you desire to destroy them.
Down.
You can't love your neighbor as yourself and speak about them behind their back. You can't love your neighbor as yourself and want to hurt them or destroy them in some way, shape, or form, whether that be physically or mentally or emotionally or whatever. You can't do that. And so what Paul's saying is that, hey, let's make a lot fewer rules and let's just make a quick understanding, which is that ultimately our desire is to love our neighbor. And it should be to love our neighbor, not just love them as yourself, but just to love your neighbor, care for them genuinely. And when you speak a critique to someone, sometimes, again, the best thing you can do for someone is critique them. They need it. It needs to be said. It needs to be brought up. It needs to be whatever. At the same time, you can do what John says in 1 John and bring the truth in love, which is that, hey, I'm gonna bring the truth into your life. I'm gonna speak truth into you. At the same time, I'm gonna do it in a way that shows you love, that shows that I care about you.
Well, and I think every critique that Jesus gives comes with the other facet of it is hope. So
100%.
It's not only we're going to pick out what's wrong. Sometimes we do that, and I think you look at news shows. News shows, they pick out everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
Even some of these talk show people that we hold up really high, they're really good at picking out what's wrong.
100%.
And I tell people a lot of times that, I have people that'll say, well, I see this is wrong in the church, that's wrong in the church, and this is wrong in the Christian community. Picking out problems is not that hard.
No, it's easy.
And honestly, I know the problems most of the time, but the solution. And so Jesus gives a critique, but he also gives hope and an opportunity for what's the
100%.
Solution. And I went back to John chapter 8, where the woman is caught in the act of adultery.
Yep.
And so there's these religious people that are all surrounding Jesus, and here they are. They've got this woman caught in the very act of adultery. She's supposed to be stoned.
They're gonna kill her. Yep.
And everybody get a rock, and Jesus writes in the dirt. Most people believe that he's writing their name down in their sin, because they leave chronologically, from the oldest to the youngest, which is great.
Yep.
But I love what happens at the end of that story. Jesus says, "Where are your accusers?" And he says, "Where are they still here?" And she said, "No, they're gone." And he says, here's what he says. He says, "Neither do I accuse you."
Yeah.
But here's what he said: "Go and sin no more."
Yeah.
So he gave her criticism.
He did. He
didn't discount the fact that she was in a lifestyle of sin. He didn't say that's okay. You can do it because those people are mean old fellas.
Yeah.
And you're doing fine. Go sleep. Because here's the thing. I can look at this woman in this every time you read a biblical story, by the way, it goes this way. You project yourself into the story. Who do you identify in this story? Who do you identify? Well, you identify with the adulteress. Now. Yeah. But what if you identified with the wife of the man who was in bed with her? Now all of a sudden, am I so forgiving?
Yeah.
They just drug this woman out of bed with your
another
husband.
guy, yeah.
Your husband.
Yeah.
And they just drug her. Now, that's different. So Jesus doesn't discount our sin. He doesn't take away the edge of that this is a problem that's wrong.
Yeah.
But what he does, though, he points that out. At the same time, he says, but here's your opportunity to be different. And I think that needs to be a part of any criticism we give. Here's what's wrong. Here's your opportunity to be what God's designed you to be, or what God's asked you to be. Here it is. And that kind of criticism, they still have to receive it or not. But what an opportunity we have to make that change,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think that's where, again, the critique is a must-have facet of critiquing someone is care and care for them, care for their future. Yeah. And Jesus obviously does. I mean, he cares about this woman. Now, at the same time, like we talked about earlier, critiquing needs to be accurate. It needs to be to the point of what we're talking about. It's not personal. Jesus didn't come in and say, well, you're just an adulteress and you'll always be an adulteress and whatever else. Which, if anybody had the authority to say so, it would have been Jesus, but he didn't say that. Jesus just comes in and says, hey, where are your accusers? They're gone. Well, I don't accuse you either, which it is him recognizing his own authority in that moment, that he does have the opportunity to accuse her if he wanted to. But he did.
And it's interesting that there's a difference between condemnation and criticism. And the difference between the two is that condemnation gives you no opportunity to reconcile or fix it. Criticism always has a plan so that things can be different. And I think that's part of our when you sit down with your kids and you unpack and unload criticism on them, but you give them no opportunity for that to change.
Sure.
You don't give them a plan. Or you sit down with somebody that you're their supervisor and you give them criticism,
sure,
but you don't give them a plan. You're giving condemnation.
Sure.
And that is one of those things that in Scripture, God is absolutely not interested in that kind of thing. He wants opportunities, and he wants to give people a chance to be something different. And I think that's also true when you look at our community. There's certain sins we elevate and we condemn that group. We're like, well, they can't change. Well,
right.
I think you can criticize the sin, but if you don't give an opportunity for God to do the work that he does, which is redemption, you're going to get yourself into trouble.
100%.
I think one of the things about Galatians chapter 5, verse 15 that's really important is something that the Bible says beware of destroying one another.
Yeah.
And I think it's Captain Obvious, but I think it's important to point out.
Sure.
The Bible never warns us of something that's not a possibility. And
sure.
So the Bible doesn't tell you, hey, be sure that you don't do this if it weren't possible for you to do this.
Here's how to fight off dragons. We don't have any of that instruction in there because there's not any dragons.
Right.
There you go.
So here you have the Bible telling us about destroying each other, and it's talking about with our words.
Sure.
And so one of the things that, you and I hunt, we love to hunt. And I love this comparison and the parallel here is that, gun safety is an important part of hunting.
Absolutely.
So a couple things we don't do. We never point our gun at somebody else, whether it's loaded or unloaded or otherwise.
That's right.
You always have your gun on safety, no matter what.
That's right.
There's just certain practices. And the reason why you do that is the potential for destruction is so great.
Absolutely.
If that gun were to go off, it would be the destruction be
catastrophic.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The Bible says that my words have this potential for destruction that I don't even think we give them credit for.
No.
So what happens is we point our mouth and our words anywhere we want to, not assuming that they're going to destroy and can destroy people, and we don't realize that we are littering in our life these lives of people that we're destroying by the way we just let our mouths say anything they want to.
Sure.
We just run off at it. We just say what we're going to say, and we're going to just pour it out there. But the Bible says that, man, it could be destructive. So criticism is a powerful tool for good, but but our mouth and our criticism can be so destructive. We just have to be very, very careful. We have to use real discernment, and I think you need to have mouth safety.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Well, I think the other thing is that, it's like, again, that doesn't mean you can't communicate hard things. That doesn't mean that you can't communicate criticism. But what that does mean is that I think we need to put more thought into it. You don't haphazardly handle your mouth because ultimately it's not saying that there's certain things that are off limits for speech. What it's more so saying is that if you don't pay attention to the way with which you speak to someone, you could cause more damage than you do good very easily. And ultimately, there's no real limit to how much damage you could cause. This verse is clear is that you may not even realize how deep the damage goes that you're creating with just haphazard words, not really even that you were intentionally mean or intentionally whatever.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like when we've been hunting before and we've sat in one place for a long time, my legs go to sleep, and I go to try to get up, and I can't get up so well.
Listen.
And then you make fun of me the whole time while I'm trying to get up, and you ruin my self-esteem and my self-image. And
we were sitting deer hunting one time, and it was cold, and we were getting up, and we were going to move to another spot because the wind was changing. And Dad goes to get up, and he rolls over on all fours, and he starts rocking back and forth. I mean, I thought I was hunting with Rain Man. I was like, "Get up off the ground! What are you doing?" He's like, "I need a rolling start." I don't know what was happening here. So,
hey, listen.
Anyway, when you that's just laughing
criticism.
together. Oh my gosh.
Classic toxic
criticism of how you were getting up off the ground. But anyway, yes. But okay, so I think this leads us into kind of the main thing. So after the message this past weekend, I got one question more than I got any other question. I want to spend the rest of our time talking and answering this question, which is, we talked about criticism. We talked about being the choice between being a hope dealer or a fault finder, kind of two extremes, if you will. One side being that we are extremely critical and find faults in people, even when maybe those faults aren't the main thing or whatever else. But then also there's a side of being a hope dealer where we're dealing hope into people's lives, and we talked about that. But then I had parents who came up to me afterwards, and they were like, "Kendall, as a parent, I feel like that I have a responsibility even to speak some criticism into my kid's life to help them grow into the person that they ultimately need to be." The question that I got the most was, how do I, as a parent, properly give feedback / criticism into my kid's life to help develop them without allowing that criticism to go too far and crush what God is doing in my kid's life or the person that my kid is becoming? How do I give that constructive feedback without hurting the kid or the kid's growth or development?
Yeah, I think we have to start with the understanding that criticism fundamentally is a suggestion that you're making for someone. Okay,
sure.
Criticism is not a command.
Sure.
Criticism is not a it's not the law. So when you use criticism, you have to keep in mind criticism is me helping someone see something that might be negative that needs to change.
Sure.
At best, that's kind of what
Sure.
it is. I think when it comes to relationships, we need to know what kind of relationship that I'm in so that I know whether criticism fits or not. And I think one of the mistakes that parents make is they may be using criticism in a relationship when there's a better tool, especially when you're talking about being a parent. So let me just walk you through it this way. The level of responsibility that I have in a relationship determines the level of control and authority I should have. So here's an example. So if my kid is a preschooler,
sure,
all right, they're not going to school yet, I have at least 99% responsibility for that kid.
Sure.
That when I have 99% of the responsibility, I have at least 99% of the control.
Control, yeah.
Yeah, in that relationship and authority in that relationship.
Sure.
So I'm not going to, in a relationship like that, I'm not going to use criticism all the time. Because criticism basically is me making a suggestion or me pointing something out in hopes that that person takes that advice. Criticism is advice at best.
Sure.
It's not a commandment.
Sure.
Well, when you've got control in that relationship, criticism should not be your go-to thing. It is for most people, though. And here's what happens. We are concerned that our kids are not going to like the criticism that we give them.
Okay.
That we're like, well, I'm telling them, your room is always messy.
Right.
You really should clean up your room.
Clean your room, yeah.
And you should be a clean person because being a clean person is a good thing.
Sure.
Cleanliness is next to godliness. Right? Was it Benjamin Franklin? I don't remember.
That's what they say, yeah.
So we use that as a suggestion, but then our kids don't clean up the room.
Sure.
And then we have to criticize them some more. And what happens is the parent starts feeling this burden. You're going, well, I'm constantly complaining about something. And the reason why that's the truth for you is because you're using criticism instead of something that's better for a relationship you have this much control in. When you have control, you don't rule the relationship with criticism.
Sure.
When you have control, you rule the relationship with boundaries.
Sure.
You set boundaries. So, for instance, the room. Your room's dirty. You set that as a boundary, not as a criticism. A criticism is just a suggestion. You're not suggesting that they clean up their room. You're not hoping that they like cleaning up their room. You're not concerned about whether they want to have the desire to clean up their room. You just want the room clean, and that's going to be a discipline they have to have. Not everything in life do you like. So I'm not going to use a criticism there. I'm going to use a boundary. So in other words, instead of me going, your room's messy, you're kind of messy, you should clean things up, I'm going to set a boundary. Here's how it works. Your room has to be clean every single week, and if it's not, you lose your privileges to your Xbox, and you're going to lose your phone.
Which is non-emotional.
Yeah.
Super simple. It's not an argument. It's just, this is how this is going to work, ABC.
And you set those boundaries for everything.
100%.
That you want their behavior to be a certain level. When you have responsibility, you have control and authority. You set boundaries and you set consequences. By the way, that's life.
Yeah.
That's how life works. We've sent a whole generation of kids into this world believing that they're fat because of McDonald's. Believing that their marriage is terrible because of their spouse. Believing that they can't make any money and they don't have a good job because of the career opportunities. When we need to be sending people into this world with the understanding that I, in a large measure, am in control of my destiny and my future.
Absolutely.
I do that by controlling, having boundaries, and understanding consequences. And so that's all that we're doing. So instead of griping constantly to your kids in hopes that they get it, I want you to feel bad about your room being dirty like I feel. They don't.
They're not going to.
No. You just set a boundary with a consequence. Now that's
in a relationship where
you have control.
Where you're control. So when control and authority are very high in your kid's life, which is the more early ages and early stages, when that control and authority are really high, the easiest thing and probably best thing is just to go ahead and make boundaries with consequences instead of trying to get your kids to come around to your way of thinking. They're probably not developed enough to be able to do that anyway. A better way to deal with that, non-emotional, super simple. Here's the boundary. Here's what happens if you cross it. And then we go from there. We move on.
Right.
That's the easiest way when that's high. Now we're starting to shift a little bit to the other. So walk through that too.
Yeah. So at some point, with your kids, and by the way, let me point one thing out when you talk about boundaries and consequences. You want to set realistic consequences. So if you're saying, hey, if you don't clean your room, I'm going to ground you for the next 30 days. If you're not really going to ground, and I wouldn't ground them for 30 days. You're trying to teach them discipline. I would give a realistic boundary. You're saying, hey, I want you to make this level of grades. I expect B's. Then what I'm going to do is set a boundary for anything less than B's. And I'm going to set a consequence for that. So I'm not going to set some consequence we wouldn't stick to. You're going to be grounded for the next year of your life. You're not going to enforce that. So you're not teaching anything. Boundary with a realistic consequence, and you stick to it. And you don't have a conversation about it like you're the enforcer. Basically what you're saying is hey, you don't get your Xbox and you don't get your phone because you're supposed to keep your room clean, and that's how it is. And the more often you do that, the more the kids get it. By the way, parents who practice criticism when they're really supposed to be practicing control makes the kids get confused. And we see this with little kids, where the little kids think that they're in control of that relationship. And so the kids think they're the ones determining things because mom's suggesting, because dad's suggesting things to them. They're not saying, hey, this is how it is. Here's the consequence if you don't do it. The longer you practice what I would call tools of influence in a relationship you're supposed to have control in, the more the person that you're trying to help is going to believe that it's an influence relationship and your suggestions are optional. If it's important to me as a parent, I'm going to set it as a boundary and a consequence, period. Now, your kids get older. Let's say, for instance, your kids... When they're preschool, you have 99% responsibility. You have 99% control and authority. But let's say your kids now, they've moved up. Let's say they're, let's say they're married. They're young adults. They're married. They've moved out. That relationship's now shifted.
It's changed.
So instead of 99% control and authority, maybe you have 50%. If you raised them well, and if you handled yourself well. By the way, if you want to have control, if you want to have influence in your kids' lives later, how you live your life as a parent when that kid is young determines that.
Makes a big difference,
If your kids can't respect you because you're asking them to control themselves, but you didn't control yourself. You tell them to be chaste. You tell them to save themselves. You tell them that God is true and real, but you didn't live that way. Then later in life, they're probably not going to take your advice. So how you raise your kids when they're little, it's important. Here's the other thing. You don't have to be a nag all the time if you have boundaries. When you are in control, set it with a boundary, let it go. Now, Flipping gears. They got married.
Okay.
The Bible says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife.
Yep.
So a girl or a boy, they moved out. They have their own home.
Right.
I would say your percentage of control maybe goes from 99% to that point, maybe 50 at best.
Yeah, sure.
That's if you had a really good relationship and a good track record. At 50%, you're no longer in control. You now just have influence.
Sure.
Now criticism becomes a good tool.
Sure.
So criticism / coaching
Sure.
becomes a good tool. You're going to give them input. You're going to give them
Yeah.
advice. You're going to give them options. You're going to work to strengthen their life. But now criticism is important because now you are giving them suggestions.
Yeah.
You don't have control.
Right.
You're just
You can't give authoritative guidelines.
you can't say, okay, you're going go to your bedroom.
Right.
Well, they're married. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So what you do is, and I think one of the key things is that for that relationship, for that criticism in that kind of relationship not to go sideways or south,
Sure.
is that you can't forget the role that you play in a relationship of influence.
Sure.
I don't have control.
Sure.
So there's going to be times that person is not going to take my advice.
Sure.
And they're not going to do what I asked them to do.
Sure.
You know what I can do? I can go back and I can reiterate it.
Yeah.
And then I can maybe add something to it. Then I can start trying to do whatever. The more I do that, the more manipulative I become.
Sure.
So I become a manipulator. Now it becomes toxic.
Sure.
You know, that's when your relationships start moving away from each other. Instead, I'm going to give them that good critique, good advice. If and when they don't take it, I'm going to take that to the Lord.
Sure.
I'm not taking it back to them.
Sure.
Not to say that if the conversation opened up again, I could talk about it.
Yeah.
But in a relationship of influence, I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to talk to them, but then I'm going to pray about it. I'm not going to dwell on it. If they come to me and ask me a question, I'm going to give them the information, but I'm not going to dwell on it. The same thing's true for the person in the cubicle over from you in the office. You might have 20% influence on them or 10.
Sure.
A critique and criticism obviously can be a part of that. Now, in your office, if you're their manager,
Yeah, if you're their boss,
you're
it's
their
different.
boss.
Yeah.
Now you may have 75, 80%
Sure.
of control, or maybe even 90% of control in
Sure.
that area. When you have control, you set boundaries.
Absolutely.
Then you don't have to sit and argue, and you don't have to arm wrestle. You don't have to keep going back to it. One of the biggest mistakes parents make is they operate with their kids without good boundaries. So
Sure.
they're constantly having to maintain it. So let me give you an example of that. You want your kids to make B's.
Right.
Set goals, set boundaries, and set consequences for those grades. And you say, look, I'm going to be looking at your grades online, which is what we do at our
Sure.
online. Anytime you make a grade less than a B, you're going to be grounded, or you're going to lose these privileges until you make another grade to make up for that.
Sure.
Okay. And all you do is look at those numbers. Now, here's what you don't. Here's the problem. We'll do that, and then we look on there and we go, hey, your grades look like it might be slipping a little bit. Are you doing your homework? And then every day we go to them, hey, are you doing your homework? Hey, are you doing? You don't do that.
Yeah.
You
Don't
set the
pester.
goal.
Yeah.
Here's the goal. The goal is you got to make a B. If you don't, it's just that standard. You're not
Yeah.
going to make it emotional. You're not going to say, I'm tired of telling you need to do your homework.
Yeah.
You're not going to tell them to do their homework.
Yeah.
You do your homework, because that's the byproduct of that is you're not going to get good grades. If you don't get good grades, then you're going to be grounded. Or
Right.
you're going to lose privileges
Sure.
or whatever. That's the consequence
Sure.
of it. And then leave it alone.
Sure.
If you're saying, I'm going to look at your room every Friday and your room is supposed to be clean, then I'm going to go in there and look. If it's not clean on Friday, then you get the consequences.
Punishment, yeah.
If you say, hey, you're supposed to be at the house at 10:30, you don't sit up every night and go, I just want to tell you something. You make me a wreck because I can't sleep and I'm exhausted and you keep coming in late.
Sure.
You know your curfew's 10:30, and y'all have that conversation 27 times.
Yeah.
And the kid is miserable and you
Yeah.
feel bad and you go, I must be ruining my kid's life because I'm complaining too much. I'm
Constantly
I must be
griping about it, yeah.
toxic. I must be a
yeah, toxic parent. Sure.
Yeah. No, you're not. You just don't have boundaries. What you do is if 10:30 is the time, here's how this works. You'll either be in by 10:30 or you lose your car and you lose your phone
Yeah.
for a week.
Yeah.
And we're going to go 7 full days without that.
Yeah.
And that means that if you have ball practice or a ball game, you're not going to that either.
Yeah.
And you can just tell the coach.
Yeah.
And when the coach comes to you as a parent, they go, oh my gosh, how are you keeping your
just
kid
letting
from
them
this
play.
most wonderful thing that they've ever had, is ball. You know what you tell the coach is? Well, then you tell my kid that they better behave or they don't get this privilege of
Yeah.
playing this sport, which by the way means not real.
Not real.
You're not going
Yep.
to play the not real sport, not real activity. You're not going to be doing that unless you stick to my rules.
100%.
And you set a rule and you set a boundary. You don't
100%.
get emotional about it. You go,
No.
hey. And when they go, well, I thought I was going to go this weekend to Johnny's house. Well, I did too. But then you made the decision not to go. And that's
Sure.
what I was baffled too. I thought, wow, I thought you wanted to go to Johnny's house, but I see you didn't really want to go because you didn't come in before 10:30.
Sure.
So you made the choice not to go see Johnny. I hate that.
Which is
Why do you do that to yourself?
Which is a valuable life lesson And
Absolutely.
it's better, and I've always said this, it's better to learn those lessons when the consequences are missing out on a sleepover instead of the consequences being
100%.
losing your job or
right.
losing a friendship or losing a marriage because
losing your
you
freedom.
didn't, or losing your freedom because you didn't realize that consequences are real and that they can really mess you up. And that a lot, when you get older, there is no mom hovering over you to make sure that you get your work done.
That's 100%
or to make
right.
sure that you're doing it. You know, there is none of that. And so the hard part is that for a lot of people, they go through these teenage years, and because we don't want to be mean parents or we don't want to be the executors of the consequences, a lot of times kids don't have any experience with real consequences until they're older.
That's right.
And the problem is that the consequences get much more dangerous
more
when you're
expensive.
old. Yeah, they're more expensive.
Yeah.
So it's better for your kids to learn this discipline of being able to, which I don't know how this morphed into parenting, but being able to listen to the consequences and understand consequences are coming and deal with criticism as well when they get older. The only way you're going to be able to deal with that criticism, though, is if you're dealing with consequences now. That's the only way.
100%. Well, and I think the other side of that is that if I set my kids up to be personally responsible, and let me give you an example of this great thing, because we've been through this a million times, and with every kid we've ever had, we've had the same
listen,
issue. Here's
I
how it
made
works.
great grades.
Grades will come in, they'll go, I'll go, well, you got a D on that. No, it's not that. She's not graded all the work, and it's not all in there. And honestly, she said she's going to give me 10 extra points. And
those sound like valid excuses to me.
And the teacher didn't include it. It doesn't matter to you. And that you just hold them to the standard.
Sure.
If I said, I'm going to go look on here. So if you want to get that rectified and get off a grounding pretty quick and not have to pay the consequences of it, then you go to the teacher and you manage that and you talk to them.
Sure.
And you straighten it out.
Yeah.
That's life lesson number 2. Because here's the beauty of it. Not only is there consequences, but I have responsibility.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to chase that stuff around.
Sure.
You're the one that's going to pay the price for it.
Yeah.
So you go to your teacher and go, hey, can you write me a letter or a note
says,
to mom who just saw my D on there, just to tell her that it's not really a D, and letting my mom or my dad know that this and this. And if that's the case, then hey, you're off. But until then, I'm just looking at the gauge.
Right.
If you become the constant reminder, think about this. My daughter just the other day was talking about this. I won't tell you which one. And she was frustrated with her professor because the professor did not remind her that she had a test coming up.
Yeah.
And she went in there unprepared for the test. I said, did they tell you about the test to begin with? They did, but didn't remind me. You know what? You know why she has that behavioral pattern? Because her mother used to remind her all the time.
Sure.
She'd be telling her, hey, you got a test coming up. Have
Test
you studied
coming
for
up,
that test on the 17th?
Test coming up, yeah.
So kids don't develop the muscle memory of, I need to be responsible for those things. And the reason why they don't develop is because we're constantly critiquing them, constantly feeding them. I'm not your alarm, nor am I your calendar.
Sure.
You've got to learn how to manage that yourself.
Sure.
And I'm not going to bottle feed you for the rest of your life. You learn how to feed yourself. You learn how to live your own life. And we give them some boundaries. And when they get out on their own, guess what? They can live a productive life.
Sure.
They can make ends meet. They're not blaming everybody else for their problems or mistakes.
Sure.
And so I think that's the way in a relationship where you have a lot of where all you have is influence. Criticism is a great.
Sure.
But a criticism at best is a suggestion. But when you're in control of that relationship, you should lead the harder parts of that relationship, leave that up to boundaries with consequences.
Sure.
Then most of the time when you're talking to your kids, it can be positive.
Sure.
You're not sitting down every day. They don't have to look at you every day and go, Mom's going to ask me or Dad's going to talk to me about the things I didn't do.
Yeah.
We're not going to.
No.
The boundary manages that.
Yeah.
You're meeting the standard.
Yeah.
That's the law.
Yeah.
You just have to do it. I get to be with you and I don't have the burden of carrying your sin.
Right.
You know what I'm
I don't
saying?
have to consistently bring it up. Yeah.
So I'm going to enjoy you, and we're going to have conversations about good things, and we're going to talk about life lessons, and we're going to have fun. But you have boundaries and responsibilities, and shielding our kids from that's not helping them.
Sure.
Being a constant critic, because really you should have boundaries, is one of the reasons why I think parents feel guilty about this. You got to
100%.
shed that. You got to
100%.
get that gone.
Well, I think also when you're dealing with kids that are a little older, when they're reaching those ages where they're making some of their own decisions, and you want them to make some of their own decisions, even though those may lead to mistakes that have to be corrected. But you're like, you need some experience making decisions on your own. You get into that age where they're driving now. You get in that age where they're doing that kind of stuff. Now they're trying to figure out college, and they're trying to figure out whatever. They're in that age where they're still under your control, and yet they're setting themselves up for a life that's going to be outside of your control. So they're making some decisions for themselves for later. They're making a lot of decisions under your control still. When you get to that point, and then ultimately when they do get married and they move out and whatever else, I think for a parent, one of the things that's valuable is being able to bring the experience that you have and be able to bring those stuff and be like, hey, I've been where you're at. I've walked through this before. This is what I did. Maybe it's positive, maybe it wasn't, but this is what I went through, or this is what I saw. This is what I wish I would have done, blah, blah. I remember you sat me down. I was like a 10th grader. I was in like a sophomore in high school. And you sat me down and you said, Kendall, your junior and senior year of high school, you said, I regret a lot of things about stuff that I did back in the day. You said, but I don't regret at all that I really enjoyed my junior and senior year of high school. You said, I did not get wrapped up about stuff. I didn't get wrapped around the axle. I just really took my time and enjoyed it. I didn't worry about college. I didn't worry about figuring this stuff out. I didn't worry about any of those things. I didn't let the anxiety flood me. I just enjoyed my junior and senior year. And I took that and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. And I did. I really enjoyed my junior and senior year of high school. Now, I wouldn't go back, but I sit there and I go, man, I really had a blast in that time. And really that was because of the advice that you gave me when you went through. You're like, this is what I did. And I'm glad I did it. Looking back now, I could have been wrapped up about this and everybody else was wrapped up about this ABC, whatever. But I wasn't. I just enjoyed going to school. I enjoyed doing my thing. I didn't, worry about anything. And I had a blast. That, again, is like, oh, okay. So he's gone through this. This is what he did. Even though I may not do exactly what you did, at the same time, man, that advice and stuff, I was at an age where, again, I was still under your roof. I'm still up pretty, you still have 99% control, but you started to kind of shift to where what was coming, that eventually I was going to move out. Eventually I was going to be, a father and a husband and one of those things and be on my own. And that relationship was going to change. And so not in all areas did that change, and I think discernment helps us figure out what areas we should or shouldn't or whatever. But you definitely, as I got into that age range of driving and whatever else, you definitely even started shifting some of those techniques as a parent, because I remember the conversations and things like that.
Well, and and what's interesting, and I've seen this because, gosh, look at the gap in our kids, you know. And, being a parent today, one of the things I've learned is that kids today have not developed good question asking skills. Yeah. And so one of the things that I think we need to do is let our kids, I think sometimes as parents, we forward information constantly to them. Sure. And we go, well, he's not even paying attention, or she's not even listening to me, or whatever. What I've started trying to do, and I will tell you, this is different from when you were young. Yeah. You ask good questions. Mm-hmm. And I'm not knocking anybody, but I'm just saying kids today have not learned how to ask good questions because things have been fed to them. Sure. They don't have to build their own narrative. It was provided for them. Sure. And it's in their games is the same way. Stuff comes at them where we used to have to pretend or whatever. Sure. I guess for whatever reason, kids today don't ask good questions. So I've started trying to work with my kids now, and I'll say, hey, I'm not going to tell you how to do that, but you can ask me and I'll tell you. Yeah. So you start asking me when you say things like this, hey, Dad, what would you do here? Then I'll give you that information. Sure. And what I found is if they ask that question, they're receptive to listening to you. But if you forward it, timing for whatever reason, they don't really listen to it very well. So I even when I set a boundary and I go, here's the boundary and here's the consequence. And if you don't understand how to do that, or you don't understand, I don't go into it immediately. If you don't understand how to achieve that or do that, you ask me, hey, how would you do that? Or how could I do that? If you ask me that question, then I'll tell you. But otherwise, I'm just going to assume the boundary's in effect, the consequence in effect. Sure. And teach your kids to ask questions. In life, it's that kind of deal. Our kids every single one of our kids that have gotten to college, we've had this same conversation. Have you called your professor? Have you emailed your professor? Have you talked to your professor? You need to talk to them and ask questions. What's crazy is if you'll ask them one simple question, hey, I'm struggling with this. What could I do? That question, that professor's waiting on it. Yeah. And they're going to tell you. They're not going to forward that to you. Sure. In life, they're not forward. When you're in a job, and you're talking to your boss saying, I want to do the best I can. How would you do this? What can I do? Yeah. Yeah. How would you do this? Man, those questions, teach our kids to ask those questions. Yeah. Yeah. And set up scenarios where, your kids have the opportunity to ask those questions and that we wait. And even in the correction or the critique, maybe one of those things where it's like, why didn't you come to me? Why? Yeah. Why are we here? And we had that conversation a bunch when I was growing up. I even remember that it was like, there were times we'd sit down and be like, why didn't you handle it ABC? And it wasn't a why didn't you handle it ABC as in like, you're an idiot and let me show you why you didn't do it this way. It was a genuine question that you had for me whenever I'd get in trouble. It's like, hey, why? So you handled it this way, ABC.
that's going to get you a consequence. That's already done. Let's move on past that. So now let's ask the question, why didn't you do it A, B, C? Was it because you didn't feel confident you could do it that way? Was it because you didn't know you could do it that way? You're not thinking? Why didn't you handle it this way? Because this way would have led to a non-consequence, but this way led to a consequence, and you chose this way.
Yep.
Why exactly did you make that decision? And letting our kids work backwards through some of the problems instead of just dwelling on the anger. And you can only do this if you're not emotional. Working through the scenario non-emotionally. Because if you're working through it emotionally, you're upset and you're mad. Then when you say, why didn't you do it this way? It's going to sound like you're not really wanting to work through it. You're just wanting to lecture, which is fine. Lecturing's cool at times. But at the same time, if you can drain the emotion out of it to some degree and say, okay, we've crossed a boundary. We know that boundary ends in this discipline. So we're past that. We're not going to harp on that. But let's ask a critical thinking question. Why are we doing it this way? Why did we do that? And that could be a critique that would lead to, that's coaching. It's like, hey, listen, you decided that, you wanted this red hoodie and stealing it was the way to get it. Why didn't you come to me and talk to me about it first? You didn't even ask me. You didn't even talk to me. You just did that. Did you not feel like you could talk to me about it? Did you not feel like what you feel like was going to happen? Blah, blah. That gives you kind of an opportunity for the kid to go, oh, you know what? Maybe the way I decided to handle that wasn't the best way. Maybe there's a better way. Or you had a project that was due tomorrow, and you didn't tell me about it. Why didn't you tell me? Well, I just forgot. Okay. Well, you forgot. Well, how are we going to next time avoid forgetting? Because this has already happened to us once or twice. Okay, so that was episode number 7 on criticism. We just finished up kind of talking about that. As always, please do drop your questions down below or anything that you may have, even ideas, points. This one, we talked a lot of parenting. If you've got parenting advice or maybe experiences that are interesting or could add to this conversation, drop them down below. Maybe we'll end up mentioning them on next week's podcast and kind of go from there. We're trying to get as many podcast episodes and different stuff out as we can. We're also working on our angels and demons stuff. So basically, essentially what we're going to do is we are going to put together all of the angels and demons study material, all the physical material from notes from the podcast shows, notes from the messages, all kinds of stuff like that. Books lists, like what books we read or source list kind of. We'll have all that put together. We're going to put that up for sale on Gumroad. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to be able to do more with the podcast as we go. And so that's going to be a way for the podcast to make money. We don't want this podcast to be a burden on the church to be able to produce it. So we're going to have a little bit of income coming from there. So that way we can do more and more creative stuff and more content for the podcast. So if you're interested in that, drop a line below. We may be able to get your email from you. We're eventually going to start an email list and some different stuff like that. So we'll let you know as that goes from there. So thank you guys so much for being a part. We will see you guys on Sunday.